Hey folks, thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Veritas Road podcast. Before we get to the fun, we just wanted to introduce you guys to our new partner, FNX Fitness.
Yeah, I've been having trouble sleeping for about 2 years now, and we don't have to get into why, but I've picked up some FNX Relax sleep aid. It's got some ashwagandha, some melatonin, all kinds of good stuff that'll help you drift off to sleep. Take one of these and sleep on a flat surface, and I guarantee you your sleep's going to improve.
Yeah, I mean, I tried out 2 of those before I handed them off to you, and it was fantastic. And I've been using their Refuel protein powder, which is delicious. I've been using their chocolate malt flavor. It's really good. Dissolves super well in milk, almond milk, water, whatever you want to use. And it's great for recovery. I've been using it post-workout for about a month now. And it's worked out super well. It's got a good whack of protein in there, some branched chain amino acids. It's good stuff. And they sell a full line of fitness supplements, sleep aids. They even have a new CBD line coming out, as well as some clothing as well. So you can go there for all of your fitness needs, really.
Yeah, if you're already using this kind of stuff, we could appreciate helping us out, helping the show out, helping FNX out, and helping yourself out. It's a win-win for everybody. If you use the discount coupon or whatever at checkout, Veritas Road 15, you get 15% off of whatever you're buying.
Yeah, all lowercase, Veritas Road 15, you get 15% off. So, I mean, who doesn't like 15%?
Yeah, we'll put that link in the show notes / description of wherever you're watching or listening to this show.
Yeah, guys, so thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you soon. Hello, and thanks for listening to another edition of The Veritas Road. I'm Carson, back here with Murph. Murph, what's going on, sir?
Nothing, same as last night. There's nothing going on. I enjoy being in a permanent place.
Yeah, we finally have a permanent home for all of our stuff, even though it looks terrible right now.
Didn't have to set everything up for this one.
Yeah, that's true. It didn't take us 3.5 hours.
Yeah, that was like 10 minutes to get going as opposed to forever.
Yeah. So we're back here with Nate. These probably aren't going to be aired back to back, but we have Nate back again, which we're really excited about.
Good to be back.
Yeah, it's good to see you back here.
Feels good. Feels right.
That's good. That's good. Hopefully this won't be quite as heavy as last time. The last one we did with you was pretty intense, I felt like.
Judging by the topic on the notes, it might be somewhat.
This may be, yeah. So, I mean, let's just jump right into it. Last time we talked a lot about religious education and the way that affected you on the whole over time, which was interesting because your experience was much different than mine and Murph's. And looking at the same evidence, a lot of the conclusions that the three of us have made separately are different. And I think that's interesting, and I want to talk about that a little bit. It's crazy that we can look at the same, generally speaking, the same stuff and come to distinctly different conclusions. Any thoughts on that from either one of you?
Well, I mean, I just briefly think that we were kind of talking a little bit last night about homogeny among ideas is generally frowned upon. So I think different viewpoints between people constantly keeps your own viewpoint, I don't want to say like in the fire, but it forced yourself to self-scrutinize what you think, and you can bounce ideas off each other and perhaps both integrate, join in the middle,
right.
Different viewpoints to an extent. So I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, conversation, the interpenetration of ideas can lead to the most productive changes in one's thoughts and one's beliefs. Conversation is the most effective way to try to get closer to truth.
That makes sense. I guess the weird thing for me is just the fact that in America especially, it seems that we have this cultural acceptance of the fact that if we look at evidence, everyone who's looking at evidence, if they're intelligent, should come to the same conclusion, and that is not the case, generally speaking, I think, right?
Yeah, I mean,
that is certainly the case.
We're
certainly not the case.
Our minds are just, we're so limited. I don't think there's any way everybody's going to be able to come to the same conclusion. That's just not how I just don't think that's how the brain operates. Like, people are so different.
Certainly on extremely complex
Yeah.
issues. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm thinking right now specifically.
Yeah, where are you going with that?
And well, I honestly didn't have this in the notes, but I'm going to mention it anyway. Like all the coronavirus stuff that's been going on for the past 4 months, right? Everybody's looking at supposedly the same stuff, yet you have wildly different conclusions being drawn in people's minds in different forms of media all over the place. And that's just a very plain, obvious, current example of how that sort of thing happens all the time.
Yeah.
And we assume and we're taught in school that, you observe something, you study it, you test it, and then you should be able to draw a conclusion that's exacting, right? But that's not happening right now. Like, in the world right now, that's not happening.
Certainly with issues that it boggles the mind that a disease, a virus could be politicized.
It's crazy.
If you want to talk about something that can cause that type of diversion of thinking on a topic, anything that gets politicized, it's designed to polarize. So that makes
Amen.
That's an absolute obstacle to the idea that you're talking about of, we should, if we look at the same evidence, then, you would think that reasonable people would come to similar conclusions. A wrench thrown in that framework so often is that of those issues being politicized.
Yeah.
And this is a huge example of that. I mean, this is a biological event that people come to almost opposite conclusions on, I think largely down to, like I said, the politicizing of it, which is not a great outlook.
It's really not. Yeah, you're right.
Just to kind of further go down that line, like, the politics is so emotional. So anytime you lump something in with that, like, you're responding on totally emotional levels, and
right.
and in conversation along those lines, like, it's real easy to make an emotional judgment based on somebody's character because they believe X, Y, like, I don't know if you know what I'm trying to say, but
if you believe something, I'm going to make an emotional judgment about your character.
Yeah.
So
that shuts down all forms of being able to accept somebody's company, because it's getting this bad in America, for believing something different than you or coming to a different conclusion.
Yeah. If someone is a victim of that polarization, then they will almost see that as the hallmark of someone's character. Which of those two systems of beliefs and perspectives they fall under, and judge someone entirely by that. It's far too common.
I mean, how have we wound up there? That's outrageous.
Well, it's in the best interest of the two parties to do that, to polarize. So part of how we end up there is that in order to remain in power, that system of separating people into two camps and saying whatever you can say to get them to fall into yours, that's certainly had a massive influence on making the situation how it is, I would say.
I think that's a good assessment. Any thoughts on that, Murph? I honestly didn't mean to talk about this when we started, and we're only 8 minutes.
Yeah, I would go into, you might call it conspiracy. I would take that route. I mean, briefly, I would say that Democrat, Republican, two wings of the same bird. The people who lay out the show, for lack of a better word, it's by design to polarize people to produce a certain bad energetical outcome, bad emotional outcome.
Well, the way that both of them would react so strongly in opposition of a third party, they would to the extent that they can unite to shut down a third one. That's to your point.
So yeah, I mean, we don't want to get too far down that, because that's really not what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. So that kind of thing, though, is what personally, I know this is what I'm about to ask you is something Mark's been thinking about for a while, but like that makes me think then, if people are coming to such wildly different conclusions based on, quote, scientific evidence, unquote, now, for me, that makes me look back and wonder, well, the stuff that was in, like, I carried around a science encyclopedia in, like, first grade because I was a little dweeb.
The Kingfisher's Science Encyclopedia, to be exact.
I thought that would make me a cool kid if I carried that around elementary school. It did
Pretty
not.
Cool. From an adult perspective.
Yeah.
The kids at the time wouldn't see it that way. But.
Right. But at least for me, it calls into question even fundamental information that would have been in the curriculum for a kindergartner, a first grader, or a second grader, because, quote, scientific information, unquote, has been so dogmatic and politicized now, right? And so that, in my head, makes me want to entertain the possibility that maybe somewhere down the line somebody said, well, okay, it's easier to teach kids this, make them believe this for our, selfish goals and purposes. I don't know if I parsed that out very well.
Well, I don't want to put you on the spot necessarily, but can you think of examples of this sort of phenomenon, like specific issues or specific, beliefs or way of seeing things that you would put in that category?
Murph?
Yeah, I certainly can. Not in my mind, like I kind of separate a lot of physics, a lot of practical physics, a lot different from theory. Right? So, specific things, evolution, and the whole systemic process of the origin of how we came to be what we are. That's a real big one. To me, gravity is another real big one.
Gravity's, yeah.
And just cosmology in general. Like the call it, I guess, space and planets and those. I in my mind, those two things or those three things. And there's other stuff you could throw in there, but those are the three big ones for me. And I guess kind of gravity and space are kind of the same. So,
are there, again, not to necessarily put you on the spot, are there reasons that you have to doubt the pictures that, the basic scientific pictures that are mainstream and given?
Yes, and I'm going to struggle in trying to manifest.
I know that's putting you on the spot.
I fail to see how these, mainstream ideas of evolution and gravity and basically cosmological history, how does that line up with the scientific method?
Explain.
Like, how is it possible to test or observe? Well, the observed part is the easy part, but the test and repeating to come to a certain end, especially with, let's say, evolution, because to test that, you need a ton of time, and it's impossible to put an experiment with that much time. Kind of see what I'm going with there?
I guess along your line of thinking, the same idea would be true of trying to test gravity, because even though it can be observed, you can't necessarily point to a particular mechanism of action.
And when I'm saying gravity, I just want to say real quick, when I'm saying gravity, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the idea that mass is attracted to mass.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I understand what you're saying now. Okay.
Well, isn't it with gravity that's represented mathematically by the relative mass of the objects and the distance in between? Isn't the mathematical relationship evidence of at least the significance of the mass being attracted to mass? Or wouldn't that be something that would point to that as, in support of it?
I'm not 100%. I'm not 100% sure if I followed that. I mean,
well, so
the mathematically,
questioning and perhaps I didn't understand the objection, if you could call it.
I guess I'm asking, how do we know gravity is a real thing? How do we know that larger, massive objects attract other objects? Like you were saying, relative mass attracts smaller mass. How do we know that?
I would, although I haven't done the experiments, I believe that there certainly have been experiments that would validate that idea. Do you not see that?
Not particularly. And maybe that means I'm dumb. But I've just never understood.
Well, it can be understood. I mean, it's understood mathematically. If
right, but
if you were to hypothetically give someone, this is the mass of a hypothetical object, this is the mass of the other hypothetical object, and this is the distance in between. We understand mathematically how that would work, and you can calculate the forces that you would then find if were you to measure. So if it's so consistent and understood mathematically, and it points to the variable being the relationship between the center of mass and the magnitude of the mass and then the distance in between. That would seem to me, in my understanding, that would point to the mass being the explaining part of it. Are you thinking that there might be something different, or that's too surface level? Or
well, maybe this example might help a little bit, is to kind of help better manifest what I'm trying to say about the problem I may have with it. So let's take the moon, for example. Okay, so the moon is going around the Earth as the Earth is going around the sun at the same time. So the farther and farther you zoom in on the Earth as it's going around the sun, the more of a straight line / vector you're going to get, right? You see what I'm trying to say by that? Because even though it's a circle, the closer and closer you get into it, it's essentially going to be a straight line. So if the moon is going around while that is going on, let's just call it the first of the month. Earth is here, you've got the moon here, Earth is traveling this way. What is stopping the Earth from slamming into the moon?
No, based on I haven't studied the physics of it in a while, but it has to do with the speed, the momentum going forward, and then the pull of the gravity creates the curve. So I'm going to sound ignorant on the physics. I would guess, but I think it is the case that it always is getting slightly closer. If I remember what I was taught long enough ago, like it is getting slightly closer, but at a rate that's in a cosmological context that's so much greater than the time scales of our lives, that to us it seems like it wouldn't be at all. So I think it will eventually, but on a cosmological time scale, not one that we would observe in a lifetime. I think there may be factors of the.
And it also seems to me like, so we'll call that first of the month. We'll call this 15th of the month, back when the moon's on the other side. Is this ignorant in to say it seems at this position gravity is almost pushing the moon away from the Earth, but then when it's back on this side, Earth is pulling to keep it in the orbit. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Not quite. I mean, I don't know if this addresses what you're talking about, but the force on the moon from the Earth would always be towards the center of mass, the collective center of mass of the Earth.
Right.
So it would always be pointing towards the Earth.
Right, which is hard for me to reconcile. And if we go back to the first of the month position, why would let's say Earth is moving this way in a vector around the sun. Gravity should be pulling moon into Earth. So they should do this do this.
I think they again,
And then it's opposite 14 months later.
14 days later?
14 days later, when Earth is still going that same direction, right,
because
in
of
a
the effect
vector.
of the sun. You're saying, or no, that's not.
Well, I mean,
that's not part of what you're saying.
No, that's not what I'm saying, really, because that just keeps the line, the vector constant. Because Earth, as we zoom in on it, is traveling basically in a straight line. And 14 days is not going to make that much of a difference in a year. I mean, maybe a slight bend. But at 0 point, at first of the month, it's, why don't they hit this? 14 days later, Earth is still going the same way, but now Moon is being drug along with it on the backside. Did that make any sense?
Well, I think it's down to the relevance of the Earth's gravitational pull on the Moon is much greater than the relevance of the Sun on it, which is what's keeping the Earth in the elliptical pattern due to how close it is. It's the effect of the Earth on the Moon gravitationally is much more relevant to that pattern than that of the Sun. The two relevant vectors of its velocity, Earth here, that way,
Right.
as it goes around, and then the other vector of towards the Earth, and the combination ends up being the curve around.
Well, and so Murph, you're suggesting that because the moon doesn't crash to the Earth when the Earth is moving towards the moon relative to the moon, nor does the moon fly away from the Earth when the Earth is moving away from the moon relative to the moon again, that suggests that gravity doesn't work the way we assume it does, right?
That's kind of what I'm saying. Or it seems to me like that would be two different forces. Like, how does one force...
My assumption there...
do the push and the pull, the keep and the draw.
My assumption there would be that you'd be looking at an elliptical orbit that would almost resemble an egg in its in shape, in that at one point it is going to be significantly closer to the Earth in a tighter orbit, and as it shoots around, right, it's going to move a little bit farther away from the Earth as the Earth is moving away from the moon relative to
I guess
the system of the moon interacting with the Earth in its orbit, that entire system is moving around the sun. So I think it's improper to say that, to think that because the moon is on the other side relative to the Earth's orbit around the sun, that would have an effect on, you would analyze the moon's behavior with respect to the Earth, and then you could zoom out, and that whole operation is working in a greater orbit around the sun. I think the intuition that the direction the moon is going around the Earth ought to change based on the direction the Earth is going around the sun, I think is combining those two when they ought, those two different orbit systems, when they ought to be viewed separately from the if you're explaining the gravitational relationship to it all. We may be getting bogged down in
I think we are a little bit here.
It is interesting. I mean,
I just have never understood how, to sum it up, my quandary. What is keeping the moon or the Earth from hitting the moon during one position, and the answer would be gravity.
And the other answer would be momentum.
Well, the gravity
what?
would be influencing the moon to hit the Earth.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So what is stopping it in the initial position?
Around.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for that constant force of it trying to hit the Earth, trying to put effort on it, as if that's relevant, but it's just a metaphor. If it wasn't for that, it would just fly off, So it's the balance of its momentum that would just take it away from the Earth, and the force, analogous to if you had a funnel and a ball spinning around the funnel. If it weren't for the walls of the funnel, which sort of represent gravity in this, the momentum of it would take it straight away from the hole in the funnel.
That's a good analogy.
That's a great analogy. But in kind of that, going along with that idea, the funnel's moving too. The funnel's moving in a direction. So when the water gets stuck back.
But in this case, the force that's exerted on the coin from the walls of the funnel is equal to the momentum of the coin pushing against the wall, right?
That's already factored into the system.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have a distorting influence on that particular orbit system. That's already... And so... It's all moving now. It's all relative to the speed that the whole thing is moving around.
I think the main point here, though, is that in Murph's case, that we accept that without much of any questioning. Like, somebody tells you that in school, and you don't say, well, hey, I can't really study that for myself.
Right.
I think that's really where you get bogged down, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I just don't understand it. That's where I'm getting bogged down. I just don't understand. I mean, that means I don't understand the mathematics of gravity, which I don't, but it just doesn't make sense.
My hunch is that, you talk to someone who understands it well enough and they would be able to explain it. Now, of course, you don't want to cede everything to the authority of someone
right,
else.
Because I mean, that's what we did when we were going through questioning our religion.
Right. So that the appeal to authority is not
which I find tough in quote science, because that's what a lot of it is. Because how many of us can go out and know these things for ourselves?
We have to divide the effort of experimentation. Otherwise, we would, if science could only get as far as one person could do in their lifetime, then we wouldn't have it wouldn't have even a small fraction of the knowledge that we do. So you have to divide,
So it comes. Now, is this too far in me saying it comes down to a bit of trust?
There's certainly a fabric of trust. The piece of it in the scientific in that system is that it's in a scientist's personal interest to prove someone else wrong, to prove another scientist wrong. That's in their personal interest. They become better off if they do that. They become more prominent. Right. They're the one with the discovery. So if you have a theory that's been proposed by a scientist or a small group or whatever, and all the other scientists, because it's in their best interest to prove that wrong, if they try and try and try and try and they can't do it, that's what it then holds up throughout time and becomes more established. The fact that it can't be shown to have flaws. That's a crucial piece of it, is that it's in their best interest to prove the other one wrong, which isn't necessarily the case in, you mentioned the religious context, that that same dynamic doesn't necessarily exist. That you wouldn't, if you're a member of the theological elite expert class or whatever, there isn't that same driving force in your personal career to undermine the old tenets, when in science that is the process.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say in practicality and in ideologically, that is the goal and process of science. But I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, in today's modern culture, to challenge long-standing held beliefs in the scientific idea is almost viewed, somebody who does that is almost viewed as like, and coming at it from an objective sense as possible, they're almost viewed as a heretic. If I were to say, well, what if gravity is not, like what if mass is not attracted to mass, or what if life did not arise from basically chemical compounds in some sort of marsh or whatever,
primordial ooze.
Yeah, that's always the cowbutt term, the primordial tube, the laptop computer.
It's a terrible term.
Yeah, what a great.
Well, there's a Nobel Prize waiting for someone who can successfully dent or take down well-established science.
Yeah, I'm just saying, at least in my observations, which I mean, let's all be honest, it's all through the internet. that is something that is not well received.
Now I can
Right.
I can attest to that, at least in the health world.
Yeah, that's what I was I wanted to bring that up.
Like in the field of health and wellness, especially in alternative health and wellness, which is like my area of interest.
Right.
People get a lot of flack. I personally get a lot of flack because I'm not a fan of mainstream medical interventions, and people look at you and they want to call you you're a science denier,
like woo woo.
Yeah. Not to bring up something too controversial, I think vaccines is a perfect segue into that.
That's a good example.
Dogmatic.
And unfortunately, that's
atmosphere.
very emotionally and politically charged right now. But the point is, if somebody says, hey, maybe vaccines aren't a good idea, you're going to be vilified by the pro-vaccine medical community. The same idea is true if I walked into like an American Heart Association type clinic and said, hey, maybe instead of taking that statin, you stop eating junk. Maybe try that for a couple of months. I'm going to be laughed out of that office.
I think some of it could be explained by an anti-conspiratorial urge that would be had. You know, you may get branded in that way because it might be sensed from the other side that, oh, that's one of those hyper-conspiratorial. It came from the you know, the pharmaceutical complex, therefore it is bad. I think there's enough people out there with more of that attitude that is what gets detected or perceived by the establishment aspect of it. Like, oh, there's another one of those, oh, everything, you know, even if that wrongly, you know, if you're coming at it with rational reasons, then you could get branded, I think, in those people's minds as one of those. And so then there's a dismissive part of it because of that, for, you know, because of the presence of people who are outright conspiratorial about it, period, irrationally conspiratorial. I think it's a reaction to a perception of that, when in many cases it would be a rational questioning that you would have of the establishment. I think there's a conspiratorial, anti-conspiratorial battle of intuitions. It seems just like a predisposition that one would have to endorse or to engage a conspiratorial idea, or, you know, and I think a lot of it may come down to that battling of intuitions. Sort of repeating myself, but that it might be suspected that you're a conspiratorial crackpot when instead you may have a rational.
Now, is there not a parallel there between the religion thing? It might be suspected that you're a complete atheist heretic and we don't want anything to do with you when you have legitimate questions about some teaching. Like, I'm just trying to make, there's a potential parallel there.
Yeah.
Basically the same, it's almost the same problem, just different terms for that.
It's mentally easier to take these big categories and lump people into them. It takes less mental work to actually have to evaluate a thought that someone has, as opposed to put them into one of the buckets that you already have
and then dismiss them based on what label that's been put on them.
Ultimately lazy. And it can cause, you know, especially in the healthcare situation, that sort of thing, I could see how it could, you know, prevent a rational opposition to something because it's cast off as conspiratorial. Or I keep going back to that word, you know, there may be a better one, but
I mean, that's essentially that's like saying heretic in religion. That's essentially a heretic in mainstream culture. I mean, it's a similar idea, I think.
In the healthcare world, it appears to have become that to a degree. Like, oh, you don't believe in X, you know? Oh, you don't think that's a good idea? Well, you're just insane. You're just a heretical conspiracy.
Well, I mean, I just think, going back to what Nate was saying about the labels, I just think those labels are unnecessary and dangerous to free discussion. Don't you? I mean, if somebody has an opposition to something, even if it might be called conspiracy, why would you not hear them out, then decide, oh, what they're saying is totally not in reality, and then dismiss them, as opposed to not listening to somebody in the forehand or in the front and just basically dismissing them because of a label you've put on them.
The argument will stand on its own.
Right. It should.
It's able to. Right.
And I just think 100% in religion, labels are put on people who question. And we've all experienced that to some degree or another. I mean, we talked about his big time journey last night. And the point I am trying to make is that also happens in mainstream science. Which you can agree or disagree with, but that's what I wanted to basically say.
And I think that in the case of science, they've developed a lot of that. They've had to develop a lot of that anti-conspiratorial urge and dismissive urge, because science comes up against a lot of dogmatic opposition that isn't rational. So there's been so much of that urge gets developed, you know, in a substantial way, because you do meet people who, of course, there are so many people who, you know, if oppose the scientific mainstream because it's in contradiction with the dogmatic beliefs that they have. And so if science has to deal with, or scientists or those who subscribe to the mainstream scientific theories have to deal with that so much, then it's easy to build up that stereotype and cast it away. That's
I guess I can, tell me if I'm wrong about this, that's kind of like saying, oh, a scientist dismisses someone who hates evolution because they're a Christian, as opposed to a scientist which is right. Well, it's just understandable, as opposed to a scientist dismissing someone who doesn't believe in evolution because they have a problem with the theory.
Right.
Do you see kind of like the distinction?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, those are two distinctly different things.
Well, it's like this is very crude. Let's just say you're Barcelona or something, and you're walking along a beach in Spain, you're looking for kids to put in the youth camp.
You're talking about the soccer club.
Yeah. Okay. But this is wild, but I'm going to try to make sense of it. You try out like 20 kids and they all suck, so you're just like, oh, well, this entire beach sucks. But there's a Neymar on the beach, you just haven't given him a chance yet. Right. But because the former 20 kids have sucked, now they all suck, you've lost a diamond in the rough.
Yeah. I think one thing that would be interesting is to try to find anyone who opposes evolution, for example, because that's the one that is, you know, key in the religion science worldview clash. If you found people who weren't religious who also opposed evolution, if there was a significant number of those, it would be easier for the scientific side not to have that reaction. But I think those people are hard to find.
Here's where I 100% agree with you.
All the people who I've ever engaged with who oppose, you know, the evolutionary picture of things happen to also be
that's
a member of a religion.
I mean, that's why I personally think religion is just another control structure for a divide and conquer agenda.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Now, a couple of things. One, so what would be you being a religious person, I guess? Would you term yourself a spiritual person?
I would definitely start saying yes, a lot more. A lot, yes.
Okay.
I will definitely say that now, yes.
Two, what about people who are religious but accept some of the tenets of, like, I'm personally, like, I think evolutionary biology, whether I believe in evolution or not, is an incredible tool with which I can understand basic, just general
health
biological science and health principles personally, because that's the world I live in right now. And so as a spiritual person, you know, it makes sense for me to accept evolution simply for practical reasons, just on a scientific basis. Whether I
suppose I would poke at, you know, why would you trust it in a medical sense, but not in a sense beyond that.
Not in like a truth sense.
In a truth sense, it seems like if that would be, sort of having it both ways. I believe it's true when it comes to this, but when it comes to something else, I wouldn't believe it.
Yeah, that's kind of like
true.
A bit of a Jordan Peterson right there. Yeah.
I mean, we can discuss
Well,
that.
that's a valid question.
I would suggest that the reason that it would be valuable in the ways that you're thinking it's valuable has to do with its validity.
Yeah, and I would say different from that, like what you're talking about is not really evolution.
Explain yourself.
Like we talked about this a little before. Well, I don't know. Did we air that one? Can't remember.
I don't believe we did.
But what does a man, humans being in their closest natural state, like basically hunter-gathering, and then kind of the idea behind paleo, to live as ancient as possible, what does that have to do with
apes?
Yeah, but I mean, even farther back, what does that have to do with transformation? What does that have to do with a fish turning into an amphibian to see what I'm saying?
You could get the health principles you're talking about that could be effective. You wouldn't need to trust. You wouldn't need to believe.
Yeah,
the
I mean, either way,
all the way back.
I guess what I'm trying to say is either way, whether you think it's just being closer to the source of closer to what we used to be. Well, whether or not the truth of that is the evolutionary line or something else. Yeah, the idea behind paleobiology, to me, does not have a lot to do with the actual need of evolution.
The basic tenet,
not far enough back in time.
Yes.
The basic tenet of that being, this is the ecosystem in which we developed, therefore we need to as closely mimic the ecosystem we developed in, as opposed to the one that's the Neolithic one, the new one that's just cropped up within the past 200 years. We're talking about such a small span of time. So whether you want to look at it from a religious side of things, so 6,000 years, right?
Either way, it's extremely different from where we once were.
Yeah, right. And that was kind of my point. It's kind of similar from both views.
But it's much simpler for me to adopt the terminology and ideas in evolutionary biology just to communicate with people, and in my own thinking to interpret scientific data, rather than just saying, because I'm religious, I'm just not going to pay attention to this stuff. Right. Because I'm spiritual. Excuse me. Sorry. And so it makes my life much easier. And this is a little bit in the weeds, but as a spiritual person, I can't necessarily deny, and this is just a terrible, stupid idea, but I can't deny the idea that some kind of evolution and a godlike entity could exist at the same time. I can't deny that. I can't say that it's true. I also can't deny it. And so for me to just reject evolution simply based on my personal beliefs doesn't make sense.
It seems like that's certainly yes, it is. I think that's why it's such a contentious issue, because evolution seems to run counter to the biblical idea, the biblical story of origin. And so people are put in a position where they're forced to pick one. Yeah. So and I do think it is hard to square the two. I think it's hard to believe in both.
Yeah, I would say it's impossible to square the two. Right. You either have to reject evolution or reject the biblical
or see it as some level of metaphor.
Right. But in
doing that, you're rejecting the truth of it.
Yeah, you're I view that as kind of a illegitimate compromise hybrid. It's very diurnal.
The truth.
Yeah, you just have to reject, which is.
So I'm living a lie.
I mean, who can ever answer that? I'm just saying, trying to meld them both together is a vain attempt.
I mean, I guess not. It's just more practical for me when I'm
Carson,
communicating with
this
people.
Is the Veritas road, man. Is more practical truthful? I mean, honestly.
But again, you describe it as an evolutionary evolutionarily informed way of looking at health. But if you're going back, if you're talking about human beings, Homo sapiens,
that's not very far back,
and the way they lived before technology developed to the point that it did, you're really not talking. It's not really an evolutionary.
Right, and that was my argument. It's not really evolutionary.
That's a fair point. I just
and
it's more like a pre-technology.
Yeah, and it's fine, and it's practical again to look at it in an evolutionary way. And I think the way I look at it in a non-evolutionary way, you're kind of getting the same conclusions as far as the practical health benefits of it. To talk about the paleo stuff, the Rob Wolf stuff, right?
Yeah, big fan of his.
Yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, it seems like I would think that precepts for how we ought to eat or exercise or whatever, it's hard to invoke evolution at all in those principles. Seems to be reaching way back. You know, if you're talking about the change of species over time, you know, it's just a whole different thing from.
Yes, I completely agree with that.
Yeah. Because if that were the case, then you would have to be. I'm getting these health principles based on the way that the species that was around before ours did things.
Yeah, so it's going to take me 100 million years to improve my health.
Yeah. Okay, that's a fair point. I guess
there may be a better word than seeing it in an evolutionary sense, and I don't know what that word is.
I don't know what it would be either. I mean, you're talking about very small micro adaptations that don't even approach the level of evolutionary adaptation that you'd be talking about, right?
Well, it's not that they don't approach the level, but they don't come with the amount of time.
Yeah,
they are the things that they are the large chunk of things that would power evolution, but that's only the case given a certain time scale.
Yeah, which is that's one of my main trying to rectify evolution in the scientific method. As far as to put an experiment on it, I mean, we just don't have the time
to legitimately test it for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in a species like a fruit fly, which has an unbelievably short life, and you can observe changes over hundreds, thousands of generations. That has been observed.
Yeah.
So that sort of thing is observable.
But does the fruit fly, does it change in anything other than a fruit fly?
Well, eventually all you got to do is add time. The proof of concept exists
given enough time, and we can't live to see enough time, though. That's why it seems to me a bit of a catch-22.
Well, all you have, the only assumption is that there was enough time. So then it runs in conflict with young Earth creationism, because they don't think that the amount of time proposed that evolution would need has ever been the case. So that's another conflict. But if you aren't a young Earth creationist and you trust the methods of dating the Earth, whether those are cosmological or carbon dating or whatever the methods are.
To me, carbon dating's made the most sense, because that's the one that's the shortest amount of time that we could potentially witness some of that within a long lifetime.
So if there's nothing preventing you from believing the status quo with respect to the age of the Earth, then you have your proof of concept and you add the time.
Right. I mean, assuming... Right, that's a very logical assumption. Assuming you accept the age of the Earth, and evolution fits right in with that, because the age of the Earth is necessary for evolution to exist.
Well, my big question there would be flies and things that do have exceptionally short lifespans. Mm-hmm. Could you provide sufficiently different environments for them to live and breed in? Like if you separated two groups, right? Could you provide significantly different environments such that as they continue to breed and reproduce in those environments, they grow and adapt to the point that those two species, because eventually they will develop into two different species, that at least
diverge from the original thing.
We see that in dogs even.
Certainly over the
well, maybe species isn't the right word, but we see different breeds in dogs.
Yeah,
right? Like they've changed significantly over a very short period.
Yeah, but I guess what we're talking about is that evolution.
Well, to finish that thought, provided significantly different environments over time, will you ever reach a point wherein a male from group A and a female from group B can no longer reproduce with one another? Because I think that would be the big clincher in that scenario, right?
Well, but there are examples.
I don't know about
species
that.
can, horse and donkey.
Yeah, I was thinking like a mule.
So I don't know if that's exactly, but the point you're making about them being different species, I'm not.
Yeah, is there a point where you can say they're different species,
Yeah.
whether or not that entails breeding?
I would say all you have to do is assume the amount of time that it would take. What I'm not familiar enough with the science to say how much time it would take. Of course, in general, you're talking about, 4.6 billion years of the Earth, talking about changes that have, hundreds of millions of years for things to happen. So even in a rapidly reproducing species like a fruit fly, if we do a 40, 50 year study, what's that to a million years, let alone 10? Not that it would necessarily take that long. Like I said, I'm not familiar with the science enough to be able to answer that question, except for once the differences started, give enough time. Unless you can propose some sort of biological barrier where at some point they would stop growing more different for some reason,
I mean, once they've sufficiently adapted to the environment they're in, such that they can reproduce comfortably, why would you continue to adapt, right?
Yes, from the point of view of adaptation, there, of course, there's also the mutation piece.
That's true.
That contributes to evolution. The two big contributors are mutation and adaptation.
Yeah,
So given enough time, you will have mutations that would come along. Those would build and build, and so it just becomes, the proof of concept is there. The question becomes, how much time do you allow for? And do you assume that there would be some natural stopping point where the changes imposed by the selection pressures of the species would simply stop for some reason? I think that's a big piece that those who don't believe in evolution you would need to be able to posit some sort of limit to it, which hasn't been observed.
Well, I mean, I guess one limit would be extinction. But isn't evolution, the idea of evolution, some kind of like big scale homeostasis?
What do you mean?
Like, because what's you were saying, adaptation drives. It's one of the driving factors in the
Natural
changes.
selection as well, yeah.
So for that to be necessary, the environment has to be constantly diverging, right? It would almost have to be somehow related. A diverging environment would have to be statistically correlated to an increase in biodiversity. Would you agree with that?
Would you? I think so.
In order for evolution to like branch out basically like a spider web.
But I guess then the idea would be, how reasonable is it to expect that an environment won't change all the time? These things are also relative to its competition in the in the ecosystem. It's predator and prey. So it's not only did the temperature get warmer, it's also, are there more of the things we eat? It's all the fact that I think the odds that an environment wouldn't change over the timescales we're talking about.
Yeah.
I think that it probably.
Yeah. So time is the biggest thing. It sounds like that's the biggest thing.
Which again, so not only it's just not that this may not be productive to bring it back to this, but the conflict between the scientific, at least in biology, between the scientific, mainstream set of ideas and that of a conservative Christian idea of things. Not only does, and just to explain the issues that evolution faces in that context, you have the issue of it seeming to undermine our inherent divinity. So you have sort of a theological issue there, and then you add to it the young earth creationism piece of it. So there are multiple reasons why it would seem to and does conflict with the classical religious.
Yeah, just going back on stuff we can 100% agree on. A big problem in conservative Christianity is no one is ever going to have that thought process to try to identify how evolution actually attacks their faith, for lack of a better word, and then try and get around or prove or disprove those proposed disagreements. Like they're just going to to that point. Yeah, they're just going to shut you down because you don't agree with the line. And I've personally seen that.
That's interesting.
Because I think even if you don't agree with any of it, why would you shut somebody down or get mad? Like, even in the Bible, it says to test your faith. Well, what part of shutting down opposition is testing anything?
I mean, yeah, that's we were just talking about that in the realm of science, like why mainstream science may shut down dissension, right?
Yeah, I mean, it happens both ways.
Yeah, the same thing happens in most religious contexts. Any dissension is shut down and attacked. Which from a scientific and religious teaching, you value rationality or you value the testing of your faith. It's both. I think it's a little bit hypocritical in both instances. Yeah. Either way, you should be confident enough in what you believe and open enough to wanting to grow that you should value dissension in almost any form.
Right, which is how people can come to different conclusions and still be friends. Like, it's a sign of maturity.
Yeah, we come full circle.
You ought not judge an idea based on its source.
Yeah.
It will stand, an argument will stand on its own.
Yeah.
It should be able to stand on its own. The classical idea of poisoning the well with respect to someone's argument. Well, you said that, and you think this, which means your argument is invalid.
Exactly.
You can't. That's not the way.
And that's why logos trumps ethos. Sorry, I just butchered
should also
that.
trump your ego.
Yes, but seriously, that's why the reason is higher than character. So, you can be in agreement on that.
So I want to ask one more question. Where does morality come from? Because we as humans have this, at least I think, inherent concept, be it religious or evolutionary, whichever way you want to look at it, which there are a lot of divergent explanations of where that came from. What is the source of our morality? Because for whatever reason, we generally have similar codes cross-culturally for just very basic, simple morality, like don't kill anybody, don't steal, don't cheat, don't lie, like these very simple concepts.
The fundamentals,
and they're pan-cultural. Like there's not a culture out there that I know of that doesn't adopt those general moral precepts.
That right there proves it does not come from religion, because the same things are present in obviously wildly different religions.
Right.
Like some random Buddhist in Tibet, China is probably on the base level, like we're saying, going to have pretty similar morals to even somebody in the Amazon rainforest.
Right.
So I wish I could remember the specific example, but even the golden rule from the Bible, they're again, I can't remember the specific example, but they've earlier sources of that precept written into code have been found. It just, to your point of, you see the similar principles across religions. And there's also, and I'm not up on this either, but there's sort of proto-moralities that exist in species other than us. Ideas of, reciprocity, fairness. And again, I'm not up on it enough to really go into the details. It's fascinating. I wish I could.
Yeah.
And it's out there to look up. I would encourage anyone to do it who's interested in it. So to me, that tells me that it has something to do with something to do with our biology. That and my suspicion is that it comes down to the necessary cooperation among hypersocial species. If we didn't have a natural set of ways to behave, however rough they are, if we weren't sort of born with it, if it wasn't part of our biology, part of our code, then that would pose such a blockade to the collaboration that allows us to survive in the first place as social beings. If people were born without the sense that it was wrong to kill someone else, how much of a stumbling block would that be in the survival of us? To bring it back to an evolutionary point of view, I think it serves the fitness of our species to have natural moral codes. We call them moral, the behavioral regulations. Naturally, that's the way I see it.
My question there, though, is shouldn't all of those regulations, moral codes, whatever you want to call them, shouldn't they be patently what we would consider self-serving, such that if I were to do something, quote, immoral, but it wouldn't be discovered, or perhaps it would serve to put me in a better place, we still recognize that action as being immoral. Like if I want to go be a total man-whore and sleep around, people would look at me and say, hey, Carson, you're being a slut. Don't do that. But, it's self-serving for me. Like I've upped my, potential for reproduction. I've had, I guess you could call it positive relationships with people in that scenario. Why do we still recognize that? Or like if I don't know, if somebody had an apple and I stole one and they, it's a pile of apples, you can't tell if I've taken one, but we would still recognize that as an inappropriate action. Why do we still recognize things like that are wholly self-serving and don't really entertain any, like there's no threat of negative consequence from those things?
Right.
Why do we still look at those things as immoral if it's just a biological imperative for us to cooperate with one another? That's what I've never been able to make sense of.
It's a deep question. It's a tough one. I would guess again that if we codify, investigate our moral urges, reflect on them and attempt to codify them in ways.
I don't know what the word codify means. That's a new word.
Into code.
Oh, okay.
And then apply pressure to others to adhere to the code, all the time. It's a way of enhancing. It's like sharpening the blade of the biological source of the. We're born with certain senses of morality, certain fundamental precepts in general, unless you're a psychopath, sociopathic, or whatever. Certain instances, obviously, where this isn't the case, but in general, things like murder, whatever we view as immoral, if stealing from someone else, it is to sharpen the blade of those natural inborn precepts for us to codify them. It ends up making morality more effective. The benefit to all of us becomes greater when they are, like I said, codified in a way and encouraged. We apply social pressure that you ought to feel this way all the time. Act as if no one's act as if someone is watching you. When they're not. Right. I think it further serves to keep people in line with the way we all collaborate and work together, and then enhances it. So I say all that to say, I think that it further serves our fitness as a species. That we all function better if there are more advanced instances of the natural moral urges that we have. I may not have entirely I don't know how that hits you.
That makes logical sense to me. Does it make sense to you, Merv?
What it doesn't suggest is why we ought to continue to care about those things.
That was going to be my next question, is why do people still look for religion then in that case? Because that's what we see as the main producer of such moral code.
Well, I want to say real quickly, why do people look for the things religion claims to provide?
Yeah.
I think that's a very important distinction.
Okay.
But
Well,
yes.
okay.
And in my view, the humans made the religions. So to the extent that a religion provides something, the humans did it to themselves, type of thing.
Well, okay.
But obviously that doesn't gel with everyone's view of religions.
I mean, that's okay.
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good, fine. Murph, do you have any thoughts on that? I kind of want to know what you think.
Would you re-ask what you asked? Okay. Why do we continue to look? Like, ask that again.
Why, if I remember, it was roughly why would if we don't think that why would we feel morally bad about doing something that doesn't obviously affect someone else?
Yeah.
Damn.
If something doesn't have negative consequences, like specifically, why would you care? Right? Like something that's not going to have a detrimental effect on you or anyone you know.
Yeah.
But you still view it as morally wrong. Why would you care if somebody does or doesn't do it? Why would it matter?
I mean, are you asking from an evolutionary perspective or what I think?
I'm asking what you think. That's the evolution. That's what I was hoping to get from Nate. The evolutionary perspective is what I was hoping to get from Nate. What I think I got from Nate just now.
There are lots of different ways to look at that. From a purely my classic Christian upbringing, I would be like, because we're told.
It would be a sin against God to do that thing.
And for the most part...
But you're not told that as a little kid. Like a little 2-year-old may not necessarily have heard those words, but they still can see that XYZ is wrong. Like they're still going to react.
Yeah, I mean, could that be manifested through your parents? Probably. But on a higher answer than that, this is purely hypothetical, but would it be possible that before we enter this life, whatever we were before then, we, in a sense, knew what we were signing up for, and whatever is putting us in this life could have been like, well, this is what you're going to. We're going to wipe your memory, but you're still going to have certain ties back to what you are now. And perhaps part of the journey of life is to essentially remember what you were then, and morality could be a spiritual tie back to that. Did that make any sense at all?
It's almost like a reincarnation style.
Yeah, it's like reverse incarnation. That your morality is because you're right. It doesn't make a lot of sense if a choice does not affect the survival of your species. Why would you feel bad about it? Like, because your conscience would still feel bad about it. So maybe that is a tie back to a previous version of yourself, or even the real version of yourself. And I personally tend to, because I've been ever since we talked to your friend, I've really been in Jackson. You know who I'm talking about?
Carolyn.
Yes, I didn't know. I've really been wrestling with everything, really, but I tend to view that, and could that mesh with Christianity? Should I even be trying to make it mesh with Christianity? I mean, that's a question you can ask. But
my gut instinct would that it'd be tough. You know, I was never exposed to any Christian theology that endorses some sort of reincarnation. I certainly thought it was antithetical to.
I mean, that was definitely my initial thought.
Right.
But once I've started looking in, especially to stuff in Genesis 6, I kind of get a little bit like, what am I reading here?
Yeah, so that you might not remember what Genesis 6 says, because you probably don't have all of Genesis memorized, like most people.
Definitely don't.
In Genesis 6, I believe this is what you...
I guess I should have explained
the
that.
The Bible discusses the sons of God coming down and mating with the daughters of men. And they have children who are called the Nephilim, who are described in the Bible as men of old, men of renown. And the way it discusses them almost sounds, and we talked about this in the mythology one we did, mythology and religion, they almost sound almost like Greek gods or Roman gods or the gods you read about in like classical ancient literature. And the idea there would be that these people continue to exist.
Well,
right?
Okay, first of all, right now we're getting into apocryphal text, which for anybody from West 7th Street Church of Christ watching this, they do exist. So, coming from our very early Judaism, like Book of Enoch, Book of Jubilees type stuff, the idea is whatever these creatures were, it was an abomination to God's original intention. Therefore, when they would die, their souls would have nowhere to go, and it would just be a continual loop. They would just reincarnate into a different avatar on Earth. So that is an apocryphal. I want to make that clear. It's not strictly orthodox, but it's an apocryphal Christian idea of reincarnation.
Okay.
At the very least, it's an interesting thought.
Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering. I don't remember any of that.
Yeah, that would not be taught at CA.
No.
Yeah. So,
I think there's from the hardcore materialist perspective, there's a whole lot of claims that come along with that sort of way of seeing it. There's a whole lot of claims about the way the universe works, and
yes, there are.
So that you would introduce a lot of things that would need to be demonstrated. Of course, that's the view from one perspective.
Well, to draw things back to where we were at, my view of morality has always been, I've kind of followed the same line as like people like C.S. Lewis did, because like the story of C.S. Lewis's conversion to Christianity, because he was a famous atheist, and wrote a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? Allegorical
books?
Literature.
Right.
Books.
I mean, that is a word. Yeah.
He did also write a lot of books. But if I'm thinking about the right thing, is his line of logic in the book Mere Christianity, which is to this day one of my favorite books.
I remember that.
Is that this inherent morality that doesn't quite fall directly in line with evolutionary morality, which I would look at those two things as two, like I would look at spiritual morality and evolutionary morality as two different things. Like I don't go steal your tractor because I know you're going to notice and come find me and shoot me. Right? But I have no problem stealing corn from your field because you're not going to notice. Whereas in spiritual morality, I would have a problem with both of those things. I see that as an inborn, perhaps, whether it was placed there by God or can be thought of as a part of our connection to our spiritual being. I look at that as an outgrowth of a spiritual connection in the human condition. That's the way I've always thought of that type of thing.
Well,
perhaps that's kind of what you were describing.
Yeah, and I resonate with that, but I could also see the evolutionary side, because you use the example of like, don't steal a tractor because you'll get shot, but you can steal corn, like perhaps because nobody's going to notice. Perhaps it could be said that over time, to better have cohesion among the species, like the idea that you don't steal corn because it's not right has been bred into your genetics to further help the species.
That's another fascinating thing, is like the human genome there's so much information in there, it's impossible to know. I don't know that we'll ever get that one figured out.
And I do want to put out the idea that a morality which would come from religion, from evolution, would perfectly align with the the evolutionary fitness of a species is not necessarily the case. There are many parts of us that have, in my view, evolved certain ways that aren't perfect and aren't perfectly in line with our fitness. So the idea that, well, if morality came from evolution, then we would have no issue stealing the corn. It's not as if our morality perfectly reflects, a consequentialist, moral philosophy. It's not that a biological morality would necessarily be that way. There are many parts, I think, this is a whole nother can of worms that we don't have to go into, but there are many arguments about consciousness and what its relevance would be to fitness.
Yeah.
So, I just say that to say there is an idea that it's an excess of the process. It isn't necessary in a certain sense for our, survival, our fitness as a species, but it came along with the evolution as a product of the processes that developed other things. I just say that to say it shouldn't be the case that the view of an evolution of a morality caused simply by evolution would be that that morality would have to be perfectly in line with our survival, our fitness. It's certainly possible that it is slightly miscalibrated in certain ways, and a lot of evolution has to do with something being good enough. Not that it would be perfect.
Yeah.
It's good enough to serve a certain function. It may not be perfect. If I don't know if that addresses it seemed like what you had expressed was maybe something like that it, in an evolutionary sense, if it doesn't if it doesn't hurt them to take the corn, why would I feel bad about it?
Yeah, exactly.
It isn't necessarily the case that a morality coming from evolution would say that you wouldn't feel bad about that.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
Is the idea I want to float.
Yeah. That makes sense. Guys, we're at an hour 16. Any I think we need to land this plane, for lack of a better metaphor. Any final thoughts? A la Jerry Springer, final thought? Is that still a thing? Do people still watch Jerry Springer?
I like the the plane metaphor.
Okay. Maybe we'll go with that.
For lack of a better metaphor, I think it's pretty good.
Okay.
For what that's
makes me
worth.
feel good, yeah.
Okay.
I just think it's important to be able to listen to other people and not get mad.
Yeah.
And not view as like,
Don't
if
judge
Nate,
an idea by
you're
its source.
right. If Nate doesn't agree with classical Christianity, like, don't get mad at him. That's non-rational.
Right.
Like, it's not hurting. It's not hurting you. Is it hurting you? Like, if you're secure enough in your own beliefs anyway, plus vice versa.
Exactly.
If you get what I'm trying to say. So it's just don't react.
No one at this table got upset at any point.
Yeah,
I think that's a good example.
And the message is that it's possible for every individual. Well, that should be possible for every individual. So that's what
you care about actually coming to a consensus on it, or even not coming to a consensus. If you care about improving your ideas through conversation,
yeah, and even freedom. Like, we claim to be such a free country. That's part of freedom too. So.
Absolutely.
That's what I wanted to say.
Gosh, yes, and that's one thing. I'm sorry. I know we're trying to get the landing gear down, but like, that's one thing I've noticed, especially in school, because like my sister, she goes to Auburn and she works in the liberal arts department there, and there's obviously a single ideology that is prevalent, and if she expresses herself much at all, like, she's gonna get attacked.
Yeah.
The same thing has happened to other people in a religious setting.
Right. It is religion like that.
Yeah. Around, I know in places around like that where I've worshipped at or where I've been in school at or whatever, it's like, you don't have the same ideology, so we're just gonna vilify you. Right.
That's
there.
right, and it's like minor stuff. Like, did you clap your hands?
Yeah.
Like, that's pretty small in the
Right.
in the mainstream theological argument of reality. So
yeah. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. We appreciate you listening. This was a little bit longer.
Yes, Carson, where can you find us?
You can find us on Spotify, Instagram, Apple Podcasts, Where else? Google Podcasts, YouTube.
Yeah, Twitter, Facebook.
We're all over. Check us out. Like, subscribe, comment. Let us know what you think. Don't give us money if you feel like you have extra money in your
Patreon,
pockets.
Subscribe Star. Both
We are very poor. So, guys, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yes, thank you, Nate.
Yeah, thanks again.
Thanks for having me. This was a blast.
Always fun.